In the year of 2047, the world was advanced in technology. My friends and I set out to play the popular virtual reality game that allowed us to experience situations with all 5 senses. Upon our arrival, we were greeted with an array of boxes, each with a different title written on it. Some were focused on family happiness, while others were geared towards achieving success or gaining power at work. In addition to these boxes, there were also options for sports experiences like skiing, skydiving, and bungee jumping. Regardless of the box chosen, players could experience the situation in a virtual reality setting with all 5 senses, including vision, hearing, smell, touch, and even the intensity of heat. My friends and I started walking through aisles of boxes, looking for good ones we want to play. Many of them had chosen ones that bring happiness and excitement. Many girls have chosen romance and love with celebrities. I came to an aisle with interesting titles on the boxes, include walking in a dark alley alone, trapped in a basement, lost in maze, etc. Suddenly, I saw one that caught my eye, excruciating pain. My curiosity took over me, and I opened the door and stepped in. It was dark in the box. Suddenly, a supersonic explosion sound blasted by my ears, causing me so much pain that I covered my ears in agony. And then, my back suddenly began to hurt. When I turned around, I saw someone holding a baseball bat and striking me repeatedly in the back. I tried to run, but then I realized that my feet were tied up. When I looked up, I saw that I was in a different place. I was tied to a chair and a man was using tongs to hold a red-hot horseshoe. To my horror, he pressed the horseshoe against my chest, and the searing pain made me scream in agony. I fainted. As I slowly regained consciousness, a putrid stench filled my nostrils, causing me to wake up abruptly. I opened my eyes to a horrifying sight. I was lying in a heap of feces, with insects crawling over my body and biting me. The nauseating odor was almost unbearable, and I screamed, begging to be released from this terrible game. Suddenly, the lights flickered on, and I stumbled out of the game box, trembling with fear and disgust. John, a friend of mine, called my name and walked over to me with a big smile on his face. Unaware of my condition, he shared his amazing experience at a concert. Then Jean joined us and told us about her lovely date with her idol. Quinn shared that he had finally tried skydiving and enjoyed it. They then asked me what I had done. I told them about the box I chose. "You spent $500 on that?" John said, and they all burst out laughing before walking toward the exit. I couldn't deny it. It was the worst decision I had ever made. I was on a small airplane, flying to a nearby island for a business trip. Along with me were 6 other passengers, a mother and her 6-year-old daughter, 2 college students, a middle-aged man, and the pilot. It was a quiet flight, and everyone seemed to be lost in their own thoughts. As we approached our destination, a loud explosion shook the plane, and it began to dive down. The sudden drop jolted everyone awake, and we were all thrown into a state of panic. The pilot desperately tried to regain control, but it was evident that we were going to crash. In a moment of terror, the pilot announced that there was only one parachute on board and that only one person could survive. Amidst the cries and screams of the passengers, the middle-aged man calmly stood up and suggested, in a resolute voice, that the little girl should have the parachute. The others thought about it, then nodded and agreed. The mother thanked everybody with tears in her eyes. When they turned to me for my consent, I, too, nodded and agreed. However, I had other plans in my mind. As the middle-aged man began to give the parachute to the little girl, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a gun. I pointed it at him and demanded that he hand over the parachute to me instead. In that moment, my survival was all that mattered, and I was not willing to let anyone else take my chance to live. The others watched me in disbelief as I took the parachute from the man, put it on, and jumped out of the airplane. The wind whipped past me, and the roar of the plane grew fainter as I drifted away. I landed in the middle of the vast ocean, surrounded by nothing but water as far as the eye could see. At first, I was relieved to have survived, but soon realized that my situation was not much better. Despite the life jacket keeping me afloat, I felt helpless and alone. The sun beat down on me mercilessly, and I knew that I would not last long without water. Hunger gnawed at my stomach, and I felt my energy levels plummeting with each passing moment. As the hours ticked by, my situation grew more and more dire. I saw no signs of rescue, and my hope began to fade. As the sun began to set, the temperature dropped sharply, and I felt myself growing colder and colder. With no way to protect myself from the elements, I drifted off to sleep, hoping against hope that someone would find me soon. In the midst of my restless dreams, I heard a voice whispering to me. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the voice grew clearer and more distinct. It told me that the airplane had actually made a safe emergency landing on an island and that the other passengers had been rescued by the locals. The locals helped them contact the airport. They were sitting by the fire, feeling warm, and enjoying a hot dinner while they waited for help to arrive. Compared to my situation, I was floating helplessly in the ocean, cold, hungry, and alone. What an irony!
As I carried my laundry basket down the stairs to the shared laundry room of my apartment building, I felt a sense of accomplishment. Finally, I had enough clean clothes to warrant a trip down here. I started loading my clothes into the washing machine, feeling proud of myself for being so efficient. Suddenly, an old guy walked in. His presence was announced by the pungent smell that filled the small room. It was clear to me that he had not showered in a long time. I tried to ignore him and focused on finishing my laundry as quickly as possible. I put in my detergent and started the machine. As I walked past the old guy to exit the laundry room, I caught a glimpse of his clothes. They were covered in a thick, black substance that looked like engine oil. I shuddered at the thought of that filth being washed in the same machine as my clothes. I vowed to never use that particular washer again. An hour later, I returned to the laundry room to move my clothes to the dryer. But something was wrong. The old guy's washing machine wasn't running, and none of the dryers were on. I was confused, as I had clearly seen him put his clothes in the machine after me. Had he changed his mind about washing them? I tried to shake off the weird feeling and focused on my own laundry. But when I opened the washing machine door, my heart sank. All of my clothes were covered in the same thick, black substance that was on the old guy's clothes. My clothes were ruined. I was furious. It was obvious that the old guy had deliberately sabotaged my laundry. I told the building manager and my neighbors about the incident, but no one knew who the old guy was. It was as if he had never existed. From that day on, I never used the shared laundry room again. The incident had left me feeling violated and unsafe. I ended up investing in my own washing machine and dryer, which gave me peace of mind knowing that my clothes were safe from sabotage.
Once upon a time, there was an orphanage that housed many children who had nowhere else to go. The orphanage had strict rules, one of which was no eating after bedtime. The children were expected to be in bed and asleep at a certain time, and any violation of the rules was met with strict punishment. One night, as the children were getting ready to sleep, they heard a strange sound. It was the sound of someone eating crackers. At first, the children thought it was one of them secretly breaking the rules and eating crackers during bedtime. But as the sound continued for almost 30 minutes, they realized that it was impossible for one child to eat so many crackers. Curiosity got the best of one brave child, who decided to investigate. The child walked to each bed to see if anyone was eating crackers, but all of the children were lying down and listening to the sound, none of them eating anything. Suddenly, all the children noticed that there was a bed in the far corner of the room. Their hearts began to race because there had never been a bed in that corner before. The children saw that the sheet was moving, indicating that someone was underneath it. They couldn't help but wonder who this mysterious child could be, why nobody knew about him, and most importantly, why he was so ravenously hungry, eating non-stop for nearly 30 minutes. Children's curiosity turned to fear as they stood frozen in terror, unsure of what to do next. Once upon a time, there was a traveler who loved to explore new places. One day, he ventured deep into a dense forest and stumbled upon a tower in the middle of it. The tower looked ancient, and the traveler wondered who could have built it in such a secluded place. Curiosity got the best of him, and he decided to climb up the tower to take a look. As he ascended the spiral staircase, he felt a sense of unease, but he shrugged it off and continued upwards. When he reached the top, he saw a breathtaking view of the forest below. He stood on the platform and enjoyed the scenery. Suddenly, the tower started shaking violently. The traveler thought it was an earthquake and held on to the railings tightly. The shaking only lasted a few seconds, but it was enough to scare the traveler. As the shaking stopped, he felt relieved, but his relief was short-lived. To his horror, everything around him turned dark. The sun disappeared, and daytime became nighttime in an instant. The traveler was confused and scared. He decided to leave the tower as quickly as possible. He started descending the spiral staircase, but after walking for a while, he realized that he wasn't getting any closer to the bottom. He started running down the stairs, but still, the tower seemed endless. He kept going down until he was exhausted, but he was still very high up from the bottom of the tower. As he caught his breath, he looked out at the seemingly never-ending staircase and thought to himself, "Should I jump?"
I was enjoying a peaceful evening walk, admiring the beautiful storefront displays and taking in the city's energy. As I meandered down the street, I noticed a man who looked like a thinner and shorter Daniel Radcliffe. His hair was long and wavy, just like those of Daniel Radcliffe's when he had wavy and long hair. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but as I continued walking, I realized he was following me. I tried to shake off the feeling, but every time I turned a corner, there he was, always at a distance, but still within my sight. I quickened my pace, but he matched my speed, never breaking his gaze. I tried to blend into the crowd, but he stayed behind, always watching me. His hair, which at first seemed like a quirky feature, now looked more and more menacing as he trailed me. I knew I had to get away from him, so I ducked into a nearby shop. I tried to calm myself down and gather my thoughts, but as I peered through the store window, I saw him looking straight at me, his eyes piercing through the glass. I bolted out of the store and ran as fast as I could. The street lights were flickering, casting ominous shadows on the sidewalk. I couldn't hear anything except the pounding of my heart and the sound of my footsteps hitting the pavement. Suddenly, I felt his hand on my shoulder. I spun around, but he was gone. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I knew I had to get out of there. I ran straight home, never stopping to catch my breath. When I got home, I was panting heavily. I told my mom about the situation, but to my surprise, she brushed it off and said it was probably my imagination. I felt sad that my mom didn't believe me or offer any comfort. I went back to my room and turned on my favorite movie, Harry Potter, to distract myself. Before the movie started, I remembered that I hadn't taken my pills yet. I took out a bottle of medicine and left it on my desk, then went to the kitchen for some water. On the bottle, there was a note that reads, "Paranoid personality disorder."
I can feel the weight of the dirt pressing down on me, suffocating me. I try to scream, but my throat is raw and my lungs are burning. Panic sets in as I realize that I am buried alive. How did I get here? I can't remember anything after the car accident. I must have been knocked out and left for dead. But why bury me alive? I try to move, but my arms and legs are pinned to my sides by the dirt. The darkness is overwhelming, and the air is getting thin. I start to hyperventilate, gasping for breath. Suddenly, I hear something. It's muffled, like someone is talking from far away. I strain to listen, but the sound fades away. Was it just my imagination? As the hours pass, I feel myself getting weaker. I know I don't have much time left. I try to think of ways to escape, but my mind is fuzzy and my thoughts are jumbled. Then I hear it again. The muffled voice, closer this time. I scream as loud as I can, hoping someone will hear me. But the sound is swallowed by the earth. I hear shovels scraping against the dirt, and I know that someone is digging me out. But is it too late? Will I die before they reach me? The dirt starts to shift and move, and I can see a sliver of light. My heart races as I realize that I'm going to be saved. But then, the light disappears, and the dirt settles back into place. I scream and scream, but no one comes. The darkness swallows me whole, and I know that I am going to die buried alive. It was a dark and stormy night, and Sarah was home alone, curled up on the couch with a book in her hand. She was trying to lose herself in the pages, but the sounds of the wind howling and rain pounding against the windows were making her uneasy. Suddenly, she heard a strange noise coming from the other side of the room. She looked up and gasped in horror as she saw the TV turn on by itself. She had been so sure that she had turned it off before settling in for the night. At first, the screen was blank. But then, slowly, an image began to form. It was the same room she was in, but it was deserted, the furniture covered in sheets and cobwebs. The camera panned around the room, showing every angle, every detail. Sarah tried to change the channel or turn off the TV, but the remote control wouldn't respond. She was trapped, watching the eerie show unfold before her eyes. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound coming from the screen, a whisper that she could barely make out. As she strained to hear it, the whisper grew louder and more insistent. It was a voice, and it was calling her name. Sarah screamed and tried to run, but she was frozen in place, unable to move. The voice grew louder and more urgent, until it was a deafening roar that filled the room. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the TV turned off, plunging the room back into darkness. Sarah sat there, shaking and trembling, too scared to move. She knew that she would never forget that night, or the terrifying show that she had watched. And she knew that she would never be able to look at her TV the same way again. This narrative is about the fear inside of me. I sat alone in the dark, my thoughts racing with fear. The sound of the wind outside was amplified in the stillness of the room, making my heart race even faster. I tried to push the thoughts of my deepest fears out of my mind, but they kept creeping back in. I had always been a fearful person, always anxious and paranoid about everything. It was a part of me that I hated, but I couldn't seem to escape it. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head, that there was nothing to be afraid of, but my inner self knew better. Suddenly, I heard a creaking noise from upstairs. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to convince myself that it was just the house settling. But deep down, I knew it was something more sinister. I could feel my inner self taking over, my fears consuming me. I imagined all the worst-case scenarios, and my mind ran wild with terrifying thoughts. I tried to shut them out, but they were too strong. As I sat there in the dark, I realized that my fears were a part of who I was. They were a part of my inner self that I couldn't escape. I didn't know how to control them, and they were starting to control me. The creaking noise grew louder, and I could hear footsteps approaching. My fears were coming to life, and I was powerless to stop them. I closed my eyes and braced myself for what was to come.